Chapter 8 of The Harbor of Doubt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Harbor of Doubt by Frank Williams. Chapter 8. Jimmie Thomas's Strategy. On a chart, the island of Grand Mignon bears the same relation to surrounding islands that a mother ship bears to a flock of submarines. Westward, her coast is rocky and forbidding, being nothing but a succession of frowning headlands that rise almost perpendicularly from the sea. It is one of the most desolate stretches of coast in moderate latitudes, for no one lives there, nor has ever lived there, except a few hermit dulce-pickers during the summer months. Along the east coast, that looks across the Atlantic, are strung the villages, nestled in bays and coves. And it is out from this coast that the dozen little islands lie. First, and partially across the mouth of the bay where the fishing fleet lies, is Long Island. Then comes High Duck, Low Duck, and Big Duck. Farther south there are Ross's, Whitehead, and Big Wood Islands, not to mention spits, points, and ledges of rock innumerable and all honored with names. It was the fact of so many treacherous ledges and reefs to be navigated safely in a 4-knot tide that was agitating the half-dozen guests at Miss Shannon's boarding house. It need hardly be said that Miss Shannon was a widow, but her distinction lay in being called Miss instead of Ma. She made a livelihood by putting up the runners who made periodical trips with their sample cases for the benefit of the local tradesmen, and took in occasional rusticators, or summer tourists, who had courage enough to dare the passage of the strait in the tiny steamer. The principal auditor of the harrowing tales that were flying about the table over the fish chowder was Mr. Aubrey Templeton, the young lawyer from St. John's who had arrived on the steamer that afternoon. Just opposite to Mr. Templeton at the table sat Jimmie Thomas, who, being a bachelor, had made his home with Miss Shannon for the last 3 years. And it was Jimmie who had held the table spellbound with his tales of danger and narrow escapes. He had just concluded a yarn, told in all seriousness, of how a shark had leaped over the back of a dory in Whale Cove, and the 2 men in the dory had barely escaped with their lives. "And I know the 2 men it happened to," he concluded, "or I know one of 'em. The other's dead. Old Jasper Schofield never got over the scare he got that day." The lawyer sat bolt upright in his chair. "Do you know the Schofields?" he demanded of Thomas. "Guess I ought to. I've been dory mate with Code when the old man was skipper. A finer young feller ain't on this island." "Do you happen to know where he is?" asked Templeton. "I came to Grand Mignon on several important matters, and one of them was to see him. I've tried to locate the fellow, but he seems to have disappeared." "Why, I seen him to-day myself in Castalia," cried Thomas. "He's up there hirin' men to ship with him. Said he was goin' to stay all night. I know the very house he's in." "You do?" "Yes." "Do you think I could get there tonight?" "You might." Jimmie looked at his watch. "The Seal Cove mail wagon's gone long ago, but I'll take you down in my motor dory if you'll come right now." Templeton did not even wait to finish his supper, but went out with Thomas immediately. A few minutes' walk brought them to the little beach where the dory was drawn up, and they were soon on their way. But before they left, Templeton scribbled a message on a piece of paper, and left it with Mrs. Shannon to be given to Nat Burns, who, he said, was to call for him at 7:30. Thomas kept the nose of his dory pointed to the lights of several houses that gleamed across the bay. They were not, however, the lights of Castalia, which were almost invisible farther south. but Templeton, who had never been on Grande Mignon before, sat blissfully ignorant of this circumstance. Later, however, he remembered that his accommodating guide had chuckled inexplicably during most of the trip. 20 minutes' ride in the chill night air brought them to a long, low pier that extended out into the black water. Above on the hillside the windows of the big fishing settlement on Long Island gleamed comfortable and yellow. Thomas ran his dory close to the landing stage and then reversed the engine so that at the time most convenient for Templeton to step off the boat had lost all motion. The lawyer landed, but Jimmie did not shut off his engine. Instead, he turned it on full speed and backed away from the dock. "Hey, you! Where are you going?" called Templeton, vaguely alarmed for the first time. "Back to the village," answered Thomas, sending his motor into the forward speed. "I got something very important to do there." "But in which house is Schofield?" cried the other. "You said you would show me." There was no reply, and it is possible that, due to the noise of the engine, Thomas had not heard the protest at all. Nat Burns arrived at Shannon's boarding house slightly in advance of the time named, and read Templeton's note saying that he had gone to Castalia to nab Code while he had the chance. "Who did Templeton go with?" he asked fearfully of the landlady. "Mr. Thomas," replied that worthy. "My God!" rapped out Burns in such a tone of disgust and defeat that she shrank from him with uplifted hands. But he did not notice her. Instead, he rushed out of the house and along the road toward Freekirk Head. The boarding house was a full half-mile from the wharfs of the village, and after 100 yards Burns slowed down into a rapid walk. "The fool took the bait like a dogfish," he snarled. "Lord knows where he is by this time. I'll bet Schofield is at the bottom of this." He had not as yet found out where Code was, and his first step when he reached the village was to go to the Schofield cottage and verify Templeton's note. Josie, the orphan girl, was there alone, and was on the point of tears with having been left alone so long with night coming on. When questioned, the girl admitted readily enough that Mrs. Schofield had taken a bundle of Code's clothing and gone to Castalia in the afternoon, she having overheard the conversation that took place between her mistress and Pete Ellinwood. When he had gained this information, Burns hurried from the house and toward the spot on the beach between the wharfs where his dory lay. He had not the remotest idea what had become of Templeton, but he was reasonably sure that if Thomas had taken him to Castalia, Schofield was no longer there. What Thomas had really done did not occur to him, and his one idea was to get to the neighboring village as soon as possible and ascertain just what had taken place. His dory was beached alongside the pier where the Charming Lass had lain for the past week. Now, as he approached it, he suddenly stopped, rooted in his tracks. The Charming Lass was gone. End of chapter 8. Recording by Roger Moline.